You ever heard the word zeal? Has anybody this week told you, have they used a sentence with the word zeal in it? Z-E-A-L. Anybody say to you that something is zealous? Or that you have a lot of zeal for something? You know why? We don't use that word. You know, the amazing thing about human language, and it doesn't matter if it's English, Spanish, or whatever, vocabulary changes. It's like the word awful. If I was to talk to you today and say, if I said I look awful today, or if your wife told you today that she thinks she looks awful, which I hope you said, no, she doesn't. Or maybe what you should say is, yes you do. Because you do realize that the word awful actually had a different connotation over 100 or 200 years ago. Awful meant awe-inspiring, full of awness, which means when the next time your wife says she looks awful, you need to say, yeah, you do. Just make sure she knows what you mean. But now, we don't use the word zeal because it's kind of going out of our lingo, but really what it means is extremely passionate for something. Incredibly passionate for something or someone. So keep that in mind while we pray. Okay? Holy Father, as we open your word and look at someone who was zealous, Father, we pray that you will teach us more about what that means. That we won't care what the vocabulary of our modern culture may tell us, but we will know what your vocabulary is, Lord. That is what matters. Father, teach us, shape us, and soften our hearts. We ask these things in your name. Amen. So, the word zealous, or zeal, means to be incredibly passionate about something. So I want you to take a second, I want you to do something for me. I want you to ask yourself a question. I'm not going to ask you to ask yourself what you're zealous for. I want you to ask yourself a question what others would say that you're zealous for, because really that is going to be the measuring stick. I could say I'm zealous about something, but really if I begin to take a survey of everybody else, they may all say something completely different. And so I want you to begin to ask yourself truthfully what others would say you're zealous for, and I don't want to hear the Sunday school answer. Because I guarantee you, most of us here would probably right now say, oh yeah, I'm zealous for God. But you need to understand something about the word zeal. Zeal is not something where it says, yeah, you're kind of interested in God. Or God's a good thing. Or I like the thought of God. Or I love God. Christ. Fill in the blank. No. Zeal is incredibly passionate for. It is something that overrides your whole being, your whole way of life. It dictates whether you go left or whether you go right, whether you go straight or whether you go backwards. It dictates every move of your being. That is zealous. That is zeal. That is biblical passion. So I want you to take a second before we get into the story about a man named Phineas, and I don't mean the triangle-shaped kid from Phineas and Ferb. Anybody watch that growing up? I love that. What do you mean growing up? Shoot, I watched that when I was I'm still in my 30s. But I watched that, man. That's the most hilarious show. Have you ever watched that? Okay, I guess you guys don't watch TV. Is that a Canada show? Anyway, it's about a guy named Phineas. I want you to think about what others would say you're zealous for. Because I'm going to guarantee you, what you're zealous for is what you die for. Understand? Numbers chapter 25. Numbers chapter 25, beginning in verse 1. While Israel was staying in the acacia grove, your translation may say a totally different thing. But while Israel was staying in the acacia grove, the people began to prostitute themselves with the women of Moab. They invited them to the sacrifices, the women invited them to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed and worshipped to their gods. So Israel aligned itself with Baal of Peor, and the Lord's anger burned against Israel. The Lord said to Moses, take all the leaders of the people, and I'm going to actually use a different word than what my Bible does because it's actually the word that should be used. And that is, take all the leaders of the people and impale them in broad, or hang them in broad daylight before the Lord, so that his burning anger may turn away from Israel. So Moses told Israel's judges, kill each of the men who aligned themselves with Baal of Peor. An Israelite man came bringing a Midianite woman to his relatives. This is a little bit later in the story. To his relatives in sight of Moses and the whole Israelite community while they were weeping at the entrance to the tent of meeting. When Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, saw this, he got up from the assembly, took a spear in his hand, followed the Israelite man into the tent, and drove it through the Israelite man and the woman through her belly. Then the plague on the Israelites was stopped, but those who died in the plague numbered 24,000. The Lord spoke to Moses, Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, has turned back my wrath from the Israelites, because he was zealous among them with my zeal. So I did not destroy the Israelites in my zeal. This isn't your typical Sunday school, children's Sunday school story. How many of you grew up learning about the story of Phinehas taking a spear and stabbing it through two people? By the way, there's more stories. There's a story about a woman who took a tent spike and nailed it straight through a guy's head. You think the Bible's not interesting? You haven't been reading it. My undergrad is history, so stuff like this just totally blows my mind. I wish I would have had time to research what kind of spear the Israelites used, because there was all sorts of different types. There was the long ones that the Greek Empire used. Can you imagine approaching a phalanx, a group of soldiers shaped like a turtle with shells all around them, but with these huge 9-foot spears sticking out on all sides? Imagine approaching that. It's crazy. Okay, I find it crazy. You don't, because you can't imagine it. But you weren't told that story in Sunday school, were you? Where you told the story of David, you told the story of David and Goliath. Where you told the part where he took a sword, David took the sword when Goliath was down on the ground and David cut his head off. That's part of the story too. See, that's the problem with children's stories that we tell our kids, is we sometimes simplify them so much, and I get it, don't get me wrong, they're kids. But sometimes we simplify stories so much and we sugarcoat them so much that they lose the impact God intended them to be. By the way, just letting you know, you do understand the Bible is written for adults, not kids. You realize the Ten Commandments, when it says, honor thy father and mother, do you understand that Jewish people, no Jewish child was expected to follow the Old Testament law until they were 12 or 13 years old? So that means when it says honor thy father and mother, you know who that was for? Adults. And yet we don't normally say it that way, do we? Sorry, a little bit of a tangent. The whole point is saying the story of Phinehas and the spear is a story we don't hear much. Yet it's a powerful, powerful story. I'm going to apologize right now in case that falls. But let me give you a little bit of background in the story, because when you read it at first, you think, man, this is terrible. God's telling Moses to go and take some leaders and basically impale them. This reminds me of the Middle Ages, where they would take it, they were Attila the Hun and other barbarians would go and kill people and then put them on stake, put their heads all across the place just as a reminder and everything. This sounds terrible. This sounds barbaric. So we begin to look at those stories and we go, man, this just doesn't make sense. It doesn't look like the God I know. And then we begin to do the total terrible thing. We go, well, that's the God of the Old Testament, not the God of the New Testament. And then I would argue, have you read the story about Ananias and Sapphira in the book of Acts? Have you read the book of Revelation? And the last time I checked, those are in the New Testament after the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Let me tell you a little bit of background on the story. This is the book of Numbers. The Israelites have been miraculously saved from their slavery in Israel. God has done incredible things to save them. Miraculous things. Basically destroyed the Egyptian empire, at least for the time being. He raised up the nation of Israel, and He crossed them across the Red Sea, more than likely the Sea of Reeds instead of the Red Sea, but that's a different story. Ask me about that later. And He crosses the Red Sea, and they go into the wilderness. And while they're there, you guys all know, a lot of you know the story. If you don't, I'll go ahead and tell it to you really quick. What basically consumed? What were they zealous for in the wilderness? Starts with a big C. What were the Israelites zealous for in the wilderness? Complaining. They were zealous for complaining. That occupied their everyday life. No food. So what does God do? Provide food. No water. What does God do? Provide water. No food. What does God provide? Food. No water. What does God provide? Water. They complain about the leadership. God does all this miraculous, continues to provide grace, continues to provide protection for them, destroys the Egyptian empire, destroys other enemies that are around them that are getting in their way. Constantly God is doing things. And then we get to the whole Ten Commandments, giving the law. And what do they do while Moses is up on the mountain? I talked about this in a sermon a while back. They do what? They make a god. In the presence of God Himself and all His majesty on the mountain, down at the bottom of the mountain, they make a god. Forget the lightning storm of God's presence on the mountain. They make another god down the bottom. God disciplines them because of that. Over 3,000 die. God's about to pretty much wipe out the whole nation of Israel. Moses intercedes, and God has grace and mercy and compassion and does not destroy them. Even though He had all right to. Because let me tell you something. Again, children's story. That story of that God, of that golden calf, it wasn't just people giving sacrifices. Remember when I shared this earlier? It wasn't just sacrifices. This is just basically, you can shut your kids' ears right now. This is basically stuff they won't even show on Netflix. Or maybe they do now. You get the point I'm trying to make? We're talking X-rated stuff going on. And I am not exaggerating. See, when you gloss over stuff, it's easy for us to go, man, God got way out of proportion. Punishment really doesn't fit the crime. God's just. We must realize this. His punishment never exceeds the crime. If anything, a lot of times, it's a lot less. A whole lot less. Not only is He just, but He's also gracious and merciful. But we go on in the story. The people still don't learn their lesson. They still do all these other things. They still start complaining. Well, they eventually get to the Promised Land, and these 12 guys go over to the Promised Land. They survey the whole Promised Land. They look at it all, and they come back with all these great stories about how wonderful it is and everything. And man, look, man, it's a land flowing with milk and honey. It's an incredible place. It's truly the Promised Land. But then 10 of them start going, but wait, there's giants. And there's these armies, and there's all these things. There is no way. Forget the fact everything else that God has been doing for them. And what do? They end up turning all the people basically against Moses and Aaron and basically say, forget this. You brought us all this way to be destroyed. Before we go into the Promised Land, we would have been better off in Egypt. Crazy. So what does He do? You know what God says to him? Mercy after mercy after mercy, grace after grace after grace. He finally tells that whole generation of people, He said, with the exception of Caleb and Moses, and with the exception of everybody under the age of 20, this entire generation will never see the promise. You see, they were 40 years in the wilderness, not because it took that long. They were 40 years in the wilderness because they made a choice to not have faith. Maybe you're wandering around in the wilderness because you have made a choice not to trust. The 40 years of wilderness is our fault, not God's. So what happens? That's Numbers chapter 13. God tells them, You're not going to enter the promised land. The people then freak out and they go, no! Shoot, we're sorry! We're so sorry! Now listen, God sometimes, in His incredible mercy, does withdraw some of the consequences, but not always. And this is one the case. So you know what they do? They try to gather up an army, and guess what they do? They run into the promised land and say, okay, we're going to do this anyways. And guess what? They are utterly and completely and absolutely destroyed. So they wander for 40 years. And you think they would learn their lesson, but they continue to complain about water. Continue to complain about food. And not just that. Other things. They reject Moses and Aaron's leadership. He said, who made you king? Moses just let God take care of that. The sons of Korah, as they're called, the Korah, not the sons of Korah are actually good. They're in the Psalms. They wrote some of the Psalms, which is an amazing story of grace and mercy, and God taking a terrible situation and bringing His glory out of it. But Korah, many of his descendants are completely wiped out. Because of their complaining and everything, there's plagues that happen that soon begins to wipe out huge chunks of Israel. And you may go, what about the grace and mercy? You're thinking, guys, this is God is continually showing His grace and mercy. And you want me to tell you about grace and mercy? You ever heard of a man by the name of Balaam? Most of you probably know the children's story about Balaam. Balaam had a donkey. Ever heard this story? Balaam had a donkey. Balaam was this prophet, not godly prophet, but this prophet that lived in the vicinity of where the Israelites were. And the Moabites Israel was right outside the location of the Moabites. And the Moabites had just seen God, let me tell you this, a people that had just complained, a people that were continuously rebellious. God had just rescued them from another army and had them victorious over it to protect them. We would never be that gracious. Would we? So before we start getting on to God, let us ask ourselves the question, will we ever do that? I'll go ahead and tell you, one thing I'm zealous about is when people turn God into a moral monster without understanding what He did and why He did it. Especially when you look around our society now and do not, and I hate it when social justice warriors begin to comment about how the church is so immoral. That is the pot calling the kettle black, people. Millions and millions of children have been slaughtered on the sake of human rights. That is an atrocity that God will one day judge people for. Sorry, little change. What ends up happening is the Moabite people, the Moabite king, Balak, he gets a little scared. He says, my armies aren't going to be able to defeat this, apparently, because their God is so powerful. So I'm going to bring in this guy named Balaam to curse them. And so he gets Balaam to come, and God tries to stop. God does stop him by having his donkey talk to him and say, you better not curse these people. You better not curse these people that have been constantly rebelling against me. You better not curse these people that have constantly been complaining about me. You have better not curse these people that have been constantly rebuking my leadership that I have placed over them. Don't curse them. I'm actually going to have you bless them. And so he ended up going and he tried to curse them, but every time he cursed them, do you know what he said? He said blessings. 5 times. 5 times, he's on a mountain, more than likely overlooking the entire valley where the Israelites are at. By the way, the Israelites are completely oblivious to this. The only reason we know this is because God inspired Moses to know this. They are completely oblivious to the fact that Balaam is up on the mountain, more than likely while they're complaining about no water down in the valley. God is having Balaam up on top of the mountain say, bless you, Israel. Bless you, Israel. Bless you, Israel. Does that not just simply blow your mind? And he continues to do this to us, church. We complain, he blesses. Woo! Seriously. God has changed us. Same today, yesterday, and forever. Balaam 5 times attempts to curse. He says the first curse, Balak the king goes, "No, what are you doing?" He says, "Okay, I'll do it again." Blesses him. "What are you doing?" Blesses him a 3rd time. "What are you doing?" Blesses him a 4th time. "What are you doing?" Blesses him a 5th time. "What are you doing?" Balak says, "Forget it, man, just go." He leaves. But here's the thing, along the way, we find this out in Numbers chapter 31, verse 6. He says, "Hey, Balak, come here, let me tell you something." Balak the king of Moab, he says, "Listen, I might not have been able to curse them, but let me tell you something. Let me tell you how your armies may not be able to conquer them, and I may not be able to say curses, but let me tell you how you're going to get them. Here's what you need to do. Grab some of your women, get some of your women, and have them go over and begin to seduce these men of Israel. And I guarantee you, they're going to start worshiping your gods, and you're going to destroy them that way." So Balaam leaves along his way. And then we get to this story in Numbers chapter 25. You see, this isn't just some massive plague or massive justice that God just all of a sudden just said, "We need to do this." God doesn't make decisions this way. He's incredibly long-suffering, as I hope you got the point by now. These women come in, and you may before this becomes some kind of hashtag Me Too thing. These women were motivated by their men leadership. Okay? But they still did it. They enticed these men to begin worshiping Baal and other gods, despite everything else that God had done. And let me tell you something about the worship of Baal. Remember when I talked about the X-rated stuff? Baal worship was exactly the same way. He was a god of fertility. Connect the dots about how you invoke the god of fertility to bring rain. He was atrocious. It was a total mockery of who God is, and a mockery of God's grace and mercy. And so God says, "Hey, you need to get these leaders, and you need to make a point." Because we know later on that this guy who took this woman into this tent, he was the son of one of the leaders of Israel, which means the leadership of Israel, a lot of the elders were doing nothing, maybe even encouraging it. And so he said, "Moses, you need to go take care of this by making an example of the leadership." Now, here's the funny thing. Moses actually tells the people to do something else. It actually is kind of implied in Scripture there that it almost looks like Moses never does what God commanded. And we don't know for sure, and so I want to be careful with that. But the thing is still going on. There's all this stuff happening in tents all over the nation of Israel, all over the people. There is all this stuff going on. And here's the greatest mockery of it all. Moses and Aaron and a lot of the other godly leaders, they're at the sanctuary, or you can call it the church, at the temple. They're weeping and praying because guess what? God has also sent a plague on the people. There are people dropping like flies all over Israel because of this. The religious leaders of Israel are on their knees weeping because of what's happening. Even though they see all this stuff going on, and then right there in their sight, right beside the place where the Spirit of God dwells, this man brings this Moabite woman and takes her into a tent. And we all know what for. Right in the presence of God again, creates this lewd act, just like Mount Sinai with the golden calf. Are you following me? While the rest of Israel is doing it too. People are dropping dead like flies. The nation is being destroyed one by one by one. And the older leadership are doing absolutely nothing. And along comes a man, a young man, the grandson of Aaron, the great nephew of Moses. Here's the funny thing. In all the other stories of the Exodus, it is always Moses who intercedes. Not this time. It's a man by the name of Phinehas. He comes and he takes a spear and he says, "I'm tired of this. He looks around and he sees the sanctuary of God here and the mockery of it. The mockery of God's grace, mercy, provision, and all this other stuff. The mockery of God's ways, God's commandments, God's obedience, God's commands, and all that. His law, everything right there. And he also looks around and he sees his people dying. He sees his nation falling apart. And he's no longer, he says, I'm done weeping. I'm going to do something about it. And he goes out there and he takes a spear, the symbol of his zeal, and he stabs it through two people. Do not get me wrong. I am not telling you to go take a zeal. I'm not taking it to say go take a bomb and bomb places that are immoral or immoral. That is just as immoral as anything else. But when God moves in history, He moves in that particular point in history. And He stabs them through. And you know what God does? You know what happens to the plague? People stop dying. But only after 24,000 people died. God's wrath is turned back. All because one man was zealous for his ways and zealous for what was going on. Zealous that God was being made a mockery, and zealous that his nation and his people were dropping dead like flies. Some would see that as an injustice. And even today people will read the scripture and say that was terribly wrong. But because they don't see the greater injustice. Thousands upon thousands of people dying. A complete and absolute mockery of God's ways, of His grace, of His mercy, of His justice, everything. Despite the fact that the chapter right before this, chapter 24, Balaam is up on top of the mountain speaking blessings upon these same people that might have actually been doing those terrible deeds at the exact same moment. Do not talk to me about God's grace and mercy. Do not talk to me about God's justice until you know the whole story. And Moses sat. Aaron sat. They had their time. Phinehas rose to the occasion and interceded. And here's the interesting thing. If you read chapter 26, do you know what chapter 26 is? It's one of those boring chapters in the Bible, I would say, because it's a census. It's a census. You know why it's a census? Because it's a census to tell us that that whole generation that doubted God could have and take the promised land, they had died off. The time of Moses and the Aarons were coming to an end. The time of the older generation was coming to the end, and that is why it is no surprise in chapter 25 we have the grandson of Aaron, the great nephew of Moses, who takes the spear and begins to intercede for the people. This is the last plague that affects Israel before they go into the promised land. And let me tell you something about the whole nation of Israel, the whole history of Israel. Phinehas' generation is the most faithful. And not just the most faithful, but the most zealous, and the most successful, and the most obedient. You think it's a coincidence that the ones that reap the best, most blessings, the one that sees the most fruit of God doing His work is the ones that are the most obedient to take the spear and to be zealous for God. God, in His grace and mercy, while you're in the midst of your rebellion, He may still decide to pour mercy and grace and blessing upon you. But I can guarantee you this, and this may sound extremely Pentecostal, but I don't care if it's biblical. I guarantee you this, blessings will pour when we are obedient. Listen, I'm not talking so much financial, I'm not talking healings and stuff like that. God may choose in His grace and mercy to do that. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is the blessing of intimacy with God always flows from a zeal for what God desires. I asked you at the beginning, what are you zealous for? I love the Green Bay Packers. Many of you know that. I used to have a zeal for the Green Bay Packers, many can tell you that. I used to rush home from Sundays before we got off at 11, and this was when I lived in Canada, different time zone, and so actually the game started like an hour before I would get home at halftime, and it killed me. When pastors like I am right now are going overtime. See, that's the good thing about being a preacher in this church, is because you don't have to worry about it, because the games will start till 10 noon, right? And most of you are college football fans anyway, so it's Sunday. But I was zealous for it. I would turn the radio on as soon as the call. I didn't care what Minnie was saying to me. Pretty sure she was telling me something. Need to stop by the grocery store. What? 10 minutes past it already. You guys know what I'm talking about. I would follow it. I would read about it. I would make sure I watched the draft. I would be all concerned and stuff like that. I would throw pillows at the stinking TV when Brett Favre would throw that other interception again. Now listen, I still follow Green Bay. But something happened about 10 years ago or so. God convicted me. He said, in view of eternity, who stinking cares about Bart Starr? Who cares about Lambeau Field? Who cares about Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers, Donald Driver, Antonio Freeman? Many of those names may mean nothing to you, but they meant something to me. Who cares? Is that the spirit I'm going to take a hold of? When people look at Jeremiah, they're going to say, man, that spirit of Green Bay really comes from him. Man, he is zealous for that. Trump, Obama, Reagan, Libertarian, Republican, Democrat, socialism, communism, capitalism. I'm treading on careful, cautious water here. One day, every single one of those will be under the feet of Jesus Christ. One day, there will no longer be a United States of America. One day, there will not be Canada. God, keep this land glorious and free. That's part of Canada's national anthem. One day there will no longer be in England. What will I be known? Will I be known to be zealous for something that never stood the test of time? All those Roman soldiers that took a spear for the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire no longer exists today. All those Greeks that took up the spear no longer exists today. Now I want you to hear me something. I'm proud to be an American. I'm glad I can let your line play for those who fought. I believe we live in one of the greatest nation in the world. Do not hear me wrong. But in the end, all is faded away. What will you be known to be zealous for? Because I go ahead and guarantee you this. What you are zealous for will impact your family. It may possibly, and it does actually, impact the very lives of people around you. Green Bay Packers has never saved anybody. Last time I checked. Except for maybe a Sunday, saved me from a Sunday of boredom. And that's sometime today. I know I'm over time. So I want you to do something this morning. We're singing I Surrender All. Now I want you to ask yourself a question. In the midst of God's incredible grace and mercy that He has bestowed upon you, what spear of zeal are you holding? And I want you to be honest. Maybe what you need to do is drop the spear you're holding and take on Phineas' spear. And it will require great sacrifice. But I can guarantee you, when you take on the Phineas' zeal, when you take on the spear of Phineas, I guarantee you the reward far outweigh any cost. What are you zealous for? Holy Father, I thank you and I praise you for this day. I thank you for these people that sit in front of me. Father, I thank you for their patience. I navigated through so many things. I thank you for your grace and your mercy. I thank you for your justice. God, all of us, chief of sinners right here, God, we are all so guilty, God, of holding spears of zeal that, God, you look upon us and you go, is it really going to stand the test of time? Father, the greatest thing we can do for our family, the greatest thing we can do for our nation, the greatest thing we can do for our friends is to take on the same spear that Phineas took on. Be zealous for your name's sake. Be zealous for what you desire of the people around us. To be zealous for your commandments, to be zealous for your grace and your mercy in other people's lives. Father, embolden us to be like Phineas, so that we can see a harvest of your blessing around us. We ask these things in your name.